Hey, amazing viewers. Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The storm raged on, thick sheets of snow swirling across the desolate highway like ghosts chasing the wind. It was the kind of night truckers hated. Visibility near zero, ice forming on the asphalt, and the bitter cold creeping into every crack of metal and rubber. But for Jeff Reynolds, a long-haul trucker with more miles behind him than he cared to count, it was just another night on the road. He sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter as his rig plowed through the storm, the wipers barely keeping up with the onslaught. His headlights cut through the darkness in patches, illuminating the desolate stretch of road ahead. He was supposed to be another 50 miles down by now, but the weather had other plans. Up ahead, a neon sign flickered in the distance, its glow barely piercing through the snowstorm. Cedar Hill Diner. Jeff didn't recognize the place, but that wasn't unusual. Small diners popped up and disappeared along highways all the time. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning, and the tension in his shoulders from gripping the wheel for hours wasn't letting up. With a careful turn, he guided his truck into the nearly empty parking lot, the tires crunching over fresh snow. A few other vehicles sat in the lot, half buried under the accumulating drifts, their owners either trapped inside by the storm or waiting it out over a cup of coffee. The second he stepped out of the truck, the wind hit him like a slap, bitter and unrelenting. Jeff tugged his jacket tighter and made a beeline for the diner, the bell above the door jingling as he stepped inside. Warmth enveloped him instantly, the scent of fresh coffee, bacon grease, and something sweet, maybe pie, drifting through the air. The diner was nearly empty, save for a waitress wiping down the counter and two other customers. One of them sat alone, hunched over a steaming cup of coffee, his phone screen casting a blue glow over his face. The other was a man in his 40s, wearing a thick green parka, sitting in a booth near the back. Across from him was a young girl, no older than 10, bundled up in an oversized pink coat, her hat pulled low over her forehead. Something about the way she sat, rigid, almost frozen in place, made Jeff pause for half a second. She wasn't talking, wasn't eating, just staring at her plate like it was the only thing anchoring her to the moment. Jeff shook off the unease and made his way to the counter, nodding to the waitress. Coffee, black, and whatever's hot. The waitress smiled tiredly, pouring him a cup before disappearing into the kitchen. Jeff wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his fingers, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the booth in the corner. The man leaned in toward the girl, whispering something. She flinched, barely noticeable, but Jeff caught it. His gut twisted. He'd been on the road long enough to know when something wasn't right. He'd seen plenty in truck stops and roadside diners, kids who weren't where they were supposed to be, women who looked too afraid to ask for help, men who carried the kind of authority that didn't need words. The girl shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edges of the table. The man reached out, fingers curling around her wrist. She didn't pull away, but every muscle in her body seemed to lock in place. Jeff felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. He wasn't the kind of guy to poke his nose in where it didn't belong. He'd seen enough trouble in his time to know that sometimes getting involved made things worse. But then the girl slid off her seat, her tiny boots hitting the floor with a soft thud. She walked toward the restroom, her movements stiff. As she passed Jeff's stool, she slowed, just for a second. And then, in the smallest, most fragile voice, she whispered two words. "Help me." Jeff's blood ran cold. His grip tightened around his coffee mug, knuckles turning white. She didn't stop, didn't wait for his reaction, just disappeared around the corner toward the restroom. For a moment, Jeff sat frozen, replaying those words in his mind. Help me. It could have been nothing. A misunderstanding. Maybe even a game. But deep down, he knew better. His gaze snapped back to the man in the booth. He was scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. But Jeff noticed how his eyes flickered toward the restroom door, his foot tapping impatiently beneath the table. Jeff took a slow, measured breath. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his jacket and slid off the stool. He needed to make a call. And fast. The air inside the diner had shifted. It was subtle. So subtle that if Jeff hadn't spent years reading the atmosphere of truck stops and roadside diners, he might not have noticed it. But he did. The warmth of the room no longer felt comforting. It felt suffocating. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder, the ticking clock behind the counter suddenly more pronounced. Every sound stretched thin, as if the world itself had slowed down, waiting for something to happen. Jeff wasn't a cop. He wasn't some action hero from a movie. He was just a trucker, a man used to long stretches of road and cheap coffee. But when that little girl had whispered those 2 words to him, something inside him had shifted. He couldn't just sit there. He reached for his phone, his fingers unsteady as he typed in 911, but he didn't hit call. Not yet. His eyes flicked to the man in the booth. The guy still had that blank, passive expression, but something about him had changed too. He was watching the restroom door now, his fingers tapping against the table in a slow, calculated rhythm. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. He was waiting. Jeff's gut twisted. If he was going to act, it had to be now. Keeping his movements casual, he slid off his stool and walked toward the payphone near the entrance. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside, everything felt too still. As he lifted the receiver, he finally pressed the call button. 911. What's your emergency? Jeff turned his back slightly to the rest of the diner, keeping his voice low. I'm at Cedar Hill Diner off Route 12. There's a girl here, 10 years old maybe. She just told me the man she's with isn't her father. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but Jeff could hear the tension beneath it. Can you describe the man? Jeff inhaled sharply, stealing a glance over his shoulder. Late 40s, brown hair, green parka, sitting in the back booth. The girl's in a pink coat. She went to the restroom, but he keeps watching the door. Understood. Stay on the line with me, sir. Is he acting aggressive? Jeff hesitated, not outright. But something's wrong. The way she flinched when he touched her, it wasn't right. There was a pause, followed by a clipped response. We have officers en route, but the storm is making it difficult. Can you keep an eye on them without drawing attention? Jeff's jaw clenched. Yeah. But you better get here fast. The line stayed open as Jeff slowly turned back toward the diner. The waitress was still behind the counter, oblivious, humming to herself as she wiped down a tray. The only other customer was the man with the coffee, still hunched over his phone. Then the restroom door creaked open. The girl stepped out, her small hands balled into fists inside her sleeves. Her eyes darted toward the man in the booth, and the fear in them was unmistakable. She knew. She knew she wasn't getting out of this place without help. The man in the booth stood up abruptly, tossing a few crumpled bills onto the table. Too soon. He wasn't waiting for food. He wasn't waiting for anything. He was leaving. With her. Jeff's pulse pounded in his ears. If that man walked out that door with the girl, she was gone. The storm outside was too heavy. The roads too empty. No one would find her if he got away now. He had seconds to act. The man moved toward the door. The girl hesitated, glancing desperately at Jeff. He stood. Hey, buddy. His voice was calm, controlled. He forced a smile as he stepped forward. Got a minute? The man froze, his hand hovering near the girl's shoulder, the grip just light enough to look unthreatening, but firm enough to be controlling. His eyes narrowed. Do I know you? No, Jeff said smoothly, but I couldn't help noticing your jacket. I'm a trucker, been looking for one just like it. Mind telling me where you got it? It was a stupid excuse, a terrible one even, but it was enough to stall him. The man hesitated, his grip on the girl tightening just slightly. "We're in a hurry," he said coldly. Jeff stepped closer, just enough to make it clear he wasn't backing down. He lowered his voice. "I don't think you are." The man's jaw twitched. His eyes darted toward the girl, then toward the door. Then, in the distance, sirens. Faint, but getting closer. The girl's breath hitched. The man cursed under his breath and moved. Fast. He yanked the girl toward the door, but before he could take a step, Jeff blocked his path. "Let her go." The words weren't shouted. They weren't a plea. They were a warning. The man's expression twisted into something ugly. "Mind your own business, trucker." The sirens were louder now, flashing lights barely visible through the snow outside. The girl took her chance. With one sharp movement, she yanked her arm free and darted behind Jeff. The man lunged for her, but Jeff was faster. He braced himself, stepping between them like a wall of steel. "Back off." The door burst open, and two officers rushed inside, snow swirling in behind them. The man froze. For a moment, no one moved. Then the officers grabbed him. He snarled, twisting in their grip, but he was outnumbered. They shoved him against the counter, forcing his hands behind his back. The girl sobbed, pressing herself against Jeff's leg, her small body trembling. Jeff exhaled slowly. It was over. Or so he thought. As the officers dragged the man outside, his furious gaze locked onto Jeff's. His lips curled into a sneer. "You think you saved her," he muttered. "You have no idea what you've just walked into." Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm outside. The diner fell into silence, except for the quiet cries of the girl clinging to Jeff. Jeff swallowed hard. That was no ordinary kidnapper. Something about this ran deeper, and whatever it wasn't over. The wind outside howled like a restless beast, rattling the thin walls of the police station as snow piled higher against the windows. Inside, the warmth of the building should have brought comfort, but for Jeff Reynolds, the chill had settled deep in his bones. He sat stiffly on the worn-out couch in a small private room, his large hands resting on his knees as he watched the little girl curled up beside him. Lily, that was her name. She hadn't said much since the diner. Her small fingers clutched the fabric of his jacket, as if afraid that if she let go, she'd disappear. She was trying to be brave, but her tiny frame still shook. The weight of whatever she had been through pressed down on her, heavier than any snowstorm raging outside. Jeff wasn't a father. He wasn't even sure if he was the kind of man a kid should trust. But tonight, that didn't matter. She had chosen him, clung to him, whispered for help when she had no one else. And now he had to make sure she was safe. The door creaked open, and Officer Laura Kane stepped in, carrying 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate. She set one on the table in front of Jeff and knelt beside Lily, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey, sweetheart," Kane said softly. "I brought you something warm. Got extra marshmallows too." Lily hesitated before taking the cup, her small hands wrapping around it like she was holding onto the last bit of warmth in the world. Kane gave her a reassuring smile before turning her attention to Jeff. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned him as if measuring how much she could trust him. "You did a good thing tonight," she said, keeping her voice low. Jeff exhaled, running a hand over his face. I don't know if it was enough. His gaze flicked toward Lily. "She's still scared." Kane sighed, pulling out a notebook. "That's expected. We still don't know the full story." She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering even more. "But I'll tell you this much. That man, he's no ordinary criminal." Jeff felt a slow, uneasy knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Kane tapped the side of her notebook. "His fingerprints flagged something in our system. His real name is Matthew Grayson. He's been connected to multiple missing persons cases, but we've never been able to pin anything solid on him." Jeff's grip tightened around his cup. "And the girl?" Kane's expression darkened. We're still trying to figure that out. He claims he's her uncle, but there are no records linking them. No birth certificate, no guardianship papers, nothing. Jeff glanced down at Lily. She had barely taken a sip of her drink, her eyes distant as she stared into the cup. She told me at the diner that he wasn't her dad, Jeff murmured. She was terrified. Kane nodded. That's what worries me. If she's been with him long enough, she might be too scared to tell us the whole truth. She leaned forward. She trusts you, Jeff, more than she trusts any of us right now. Jeff frowned. I'm just a trucker. I don't know how to help her. You already did, Kane said firmly. You called when most people would have looked the other way. She hesitated before adding, and I think you might be the only one she'll talk to. Jeff sat back, his mind racing. He had never been in a situation like this before. He had seen a lot in his years on the road. People down on their luck, runaways, kids wandering truck stops with nowhere to go. But this felt bigger. Lily shifted beside him. Her small voice broke the silence. Mr. Jeff. He turned to her, his tone softer than he thought possible. Yeah, sweetheart. Her fingers gripped the edge of her sweater, her eyes darting between him and Kane. Am I gonna have to go back? Jeff felt something tighten in his chest. Kane leaned in. Go back where, honey? Lily swallowed hard. To him, one of the officers, a tall woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Detective Kane. We have the upstairs room set up for her. Kane nodded. Good. I'll be inside in a minute. Jeff felt Lily press closer against his leg, her breath shaky. Can Mr. Jeff stay? Kane hesitated, then sighed. All right, but just for a little while. Jeff followed them inside, shaking off the cold as they stepped into the warmth of the house. The interior was plain but comfortable. Soft couches, a fireplace crackling in the corner, and a small kitchen off to the side. It wasn't home, but it was better than a cold police station. Lily stayed glued to Jeff's side as they walked toward the stairs. The officer led them up to a small bedroom. Nothing fancy, just a bed, a nightstand, and a window that overlooked the snowy trees outside. Jeff knelt down beside her, lowering his voice. You gonna be okay here, kid? Lily fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. What if he finds me? Jeff's jaw tightened. He won't. She didn't look convinced. Kane leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. We have officers watching the house all night. No one's getting through. Lily chewed her lip. That man. He always said no one could stop him. He said people like him don't get caught. Jeff's stomach twisted. Well, he's caught now. Lily hesitated. For how long? The room fell silent. Kane exhaled. We're doing everything we can to keep him locked up, Lily, but we need to know everything you can tell us. Lily's fingers dug into the fabric of Jeff's jacket. I don't remember everything, she admitted, but I know he wasn't alone. Jeff's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Lily swallowed hard. There were others. They had meetings. Late at night. I wasn't allowed to see them, but I heard them talking. Kane's eyes darkened. What did they talk about? Lily shook her head. I don't know, but sometimes they brought new kids. Jeff's breath hitched. New kids. Lily nodded slowly. Some of them left. Some of them didn't. Silence settled in the room like a weight pressing down on their chests. Kane straightened, her expression unreadable. I need to make a call. She turned and walked out of the room, pulling her phone from her pocket. Jeff stayed where he was, his mind reeling. Lily hadn't just been taken. She had been part of something bigger, something worse. And whatever it wasn't over. Lily's voice broke the silence. Mr. Jeff. He looked at her. Yeah, sweetheart. Her hands clutched his sleeve. I don't want to go back to the dark. Jeff swallowed hard. He had no idea what she had been through, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her go through it alone. The wind had calmed by morning. But the tension in the safe house had not. The snowfall that turned the world outside into a quiet white abyss, muffling every sound, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Jeff sat in the small kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee growing cold between his hands. He hadn't slept much. Neither had Lily. She had curled up on the bed the night before, but every time he thought she had drifted off, he'd hear the rustling of blankets, the soft tremor of breath catching in her throat. She was waiting for something, or someone. Kane had spent most of the night in another room, making phone calls, checking in with officers who were running background checks, cross-referencing missing child reports. But so far, they had nothing. Lily's name didn't appear anywhere. No records, no missing person reports, no grieving parents searching for their lost daughter. It was as if she didn't exist. That thought chilled Jeff more than the storm outside ever could. He exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand down his face. He had spent most of his life on the road, moving from city to city, never staying in one place long enough to care about anything other than the next mile marker. But this little girl, this terrified kid who had whispered for help when no one else could hear her, she had cracked something open inside him, and now he didn't know how to walk away. A soft shuffling sound caught his attention. He turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, her pink sweater hanging loosely off her small frame. "Hey, kid," Jeff said gently. "Did you sleep at all?" She shook her head. Jeff pulled out the chair beside him. "Come sit." She hesitated, then slowly crossed the room and climbed onto the chair. He slid a mug of hot cocoa toward her, but she just wrapped her hands around it without drinking. For a long moment, she stared at the table. Then, in a whisper so quiet he almost missed it, she asked, "What if he wasn't the only one?" Jeff's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Lily's fingers dug into the ceramic mug. "He always said he wasn't the only one watching, that there were others." Jeff glanced toward the hallway where Kane had been making calls all night. "Lily, if there are others, we need to tell the police." She shook her head violently. "No. No, they'll know. They'll come find me." Her small body trembled, and Jeff felt his heart squeeze in his chest. This wasn't just fear. This was something deeper, something broken. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Listen to me, sweetheart. You're safe here. No one's getting through that door without going through me first. And I don't let bad people win." Lily blinked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face for something. For reassurance, for truth, for a promise. And Jeff wasn't about to let her down. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Kane appeared in the doorway, her face drawn tight. "We need to talk." Jeff's gut twisted. He knew that tone. He had heard it from cops before, when they were about to say something that changed everything. Lily shrank back in her seat, gripping Jeff's sleeve. Kane exhaled. "The guy we arrested, Matthew Grayson. He's dead." The words hit Jeff like a punch. "What?" Kane's jaw clenched. He was being transported to a holding facility. The car never made it. Jeff's blood ran cold. "Never made it." She hesitated, then said, "They found the vehicle abandoned on the side of the road. The officers transporting him were unconscious when backup arrived. No sign of Grayson." Lily gasped, her grip tightening around Jeff's arm. Jeff felt a slow, creeping dread settle into his bones. "You said he was dead." Kane nodded grimly. "They found his body a mile away. Shot execution style." Jeff stared at her. Someone killed him. Kane's face was unreadable. Someone didn't want him talking. A chill ran down Jeff's spine. He looked down at Lily. She was shaking, her breath coming in quick, panicked bursts. "He told me," she whispered. "He told me they wouldn't let him go back. He said once they took someone, they never let them leave." Jeff exchanged a glance with Kane. This wasn't just one man. This was bigger. And now, whoever had been after Grayson might be after Lily too. Kane straightened. "I'm putting in for emergency relocation. We need to move her somewhere safe." "No. The word left Jeff's mouth before he even realized it. Kane turned to him, her brow furrowed. No. Jeff took a breath. If you put her in a system, they'll find her. She said it herself. These people don't let go. He looked at Lily. She needs something better than another locked door. Kane studied him carefully. And what exactly are you suggesting? Jeff's mind was already made up. I take her. Kane's lips parted slightly. Jeff, this isn't how it works. You're not a guardian. You're not. She trusts me. His voice was steady, certain. And I'm not just gonna drop her off and hope for the best. Lily was staring at him now, her eyes wide. Kane rubbed her temples. Jeff, do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into? Jeff nodded. Yeah, I do. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just passing through. He was staying. For her. Kane sighed, shaking her head. This is insane. The paperwork alone. Then get started, Jeff said. Kane huffed a bitter laugh. You're really serious about this? Jeff looked down at Lily. Her small hand slipped into his. She didn't have to say anything. He already knew. I'm not leaving her behind, Jeff said. Kane studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. All right, she said. Let's do this right. Jeff exhaled, squeezing Lily's hand. The storm outside had passed, but another one was coming. And this time, he wasn't just driving through it. He was standing in the middle of it, ready to fight. For her. For family. For the only road ahead that finally felt like home. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.